I'm now recording this meeting so that if you have anyone who thinks interested afterwards, we can share the link and they can sit down with their bottle of Michel Chablis and watch it again. So basically, the idea of this Words with a Winemaker, Guillaume is our first winemaker on this, is that we wanted to be a little bit more interactive and actually give everyone the chance to say hello to our winemakers and ask them questions personally. And a lot of you know Michel Chablis personally, but you haven't met Guillaume. And so I want to introduce you to Guillaume Michel, who took over the Domaine how many years ago now, Guillaume?
15 years ago.
Okay. He doesn't look old enough, but so will you give us a little bit of a history of the Domaine, Guillaume?
Yeah, sure. So this is a family estate based in Chablis, in the village of Chablis. So my family has been making wine for I'm the sixth generation, actually. So roughly it all started in about 1850. And actually it's a bit more than that because thanks to genealogy that my mom did after she retired, and on the web you can go very quickly now because everything is online. She realized that we don't make wine since 1850, but more like since 1680 something. So she told me that I'm more like the 11th generation actually.
Okay. Yeah,
but officially it's still the sixth generation because I wait so that she's totally finished with her research. But it's been a long time that we make wine in Chablis. And the particularity of my family is that it has always been a family of exclusively winemakers. Here in the area, and especially 50, 60, 80 years ago, people used to make not only wine, but also having some cereal, having some animals and stuff. The reason was at this time because wine was not, Chablis was not as famous as it is today. And it was quite difficult to live only making wine. The wine business at this time was quite difficult in Chablis. Plus they have, and we still have, one of the big characteristics of Chablis is the spring frost that can just destroy everything in just a few nights at spring. And at this time, they had also a lot of issues with the spring frost. So sometimes they didn't have, the harvest was just zero. So they had to find another way to live, another way to get to have some money. So that was the particularity of this area, except in my family. My family has always been 100% winemakers. I see a screen.
Yeah, now. Maria is screen sharing. I'm impressed, Maria. I'm going to, hold on. Maria, if you can stop your screen sharing, we'll keep chatting away. But the joys of Zoom and all these buttons, it's like putting your hand up in an auction. I will screen share and then that will move it on. So here we go.
Perfect. Yes.
I will screen share. There we go. There we go. I'm going to screen share my screen and then we will, hold on, and then we will have it actually, which would be more, because I've got some lovely pictures from Guillaume, because yesterday, hold on, I'm going to change screens. Yesterday, Guillaume gave me access to his, here we go. There we go. Can everyone see the screen there? And they should have the person who's talking at the top of that. Does that work? Yeah.
Yeah, I see everything.
Sorry, Guillaume, on you go. I'm going to stop screen sharing for a minute and go back to the people's faces because it's much more interesting. But if we have the same, we can go back onto the screen. Over to you again. Sorry about the interruption.
No problem. So yes, so I'm part of a family, a Chablis family that is established in Chablis for a lot of generations. So basically, I'm the sixth generation of winemaker. So today we have 25 hectares of vineyards that are all localized around the village of Chablis. And you may know that in Chablis, we have 4 levels of appellations, starting with the Petit Chablis, the Chablis, and then the Premier Cru and the Grand Cru. And we are lucky to have vineyards in the 4 appellation. And especially, we are even more lucky to have quite the majority of our production is localized in the Premier and Grand Cru area of Chablis.
Yeah, because you have 14 hectares of Premier Cru, don't you?
That's it. That's it. Yeah. And a bit more than 2 hectares of Grand Cru.
Yeah, which is
Premier Cru and Grand Cru is almost 17 hectares, and so which is the majority of the wine that we produce. And this is great for us because we have 3 different Grand Cru, we have 7 different Premier Cru. So you can imagine that as a winemaker, it's a real pleasure to work in that vineyard because you can feel all the different expression of Chablis terroir.
Mm. And which are your Premier Crus? Where have you got Premier Crus?
So we have, so you know, I'll try to show you my map. I don't know if you see it on the screen.
Brilliant.
Yeah, so in the middle here, you have the village of Chablis, where I am now. So a small village, 2,400 inhabitants. So clearly, it's a very quiet village where you won't see the difference if it's lockdown or not. Here in Chablis, actually, very quiet village, surrounded by all those vineyards that you can see here. So today, Chablis, roughly, it's almost 6,000 hectares of vineyards. And to give you an idea, back in the 50s, I think it was something like 500 hectares. So it's a vineyard that did expand a lot recently, actually, because back in the 50s, the vineyards were all localized here. And then after it started to expand.
Just to interrupt a little bit there, do you think the expansion, obviously there are a lot of famous sites that were included in the expanded vineyards. So
sure.
Unlike in Champagne where they're expanding into less quality areas, the expansion of Chablis can only be a good thing.
It is, it is. We discovered some very fantastic new vineyards, but we all agree that today that this expansion now has to stop, because if you continue to expand, then first of all, it's not the appellation, but in terms of soil, the terroir is different, and you do not have the soil characteristic that makes Chablis so unique. So at some point you have to stop. Yeah, and that's so we can say that the size that we have now is that's the biggest side, and it won't continue to expand. We have reached the limits.
And the soil, will you explain a little bit about the soil, about the Kimmeridgian and the Portlandian clay?
Of course, yeah. So basically the 2 main soil that we have in Chablis are just what you said, Kimmeridgian and Portlandian. Kimmeridgian, you will find the Kimmeridgian a bit everywhere, but more specifically on slopes, while the Portlandian will be found more on the plateau at the top of the hills. That's roughly the idea, the main idea. Of course, you will have some exceptions at some point, because if you look here, you will see all the diversity of the map of the vineyards in Chablis. Because also one of the particularity of Chablis is that you have the village in the middle, and then you have a lot of valleys that go like that. It's a bit like a star, actually. So you can imagine that you will have a lot of differences of soil and of microclimate, because you will have a lot of differences of exposure, temperature. Some will have more the morning sun, some will have more the afternoon sun. So all those characteristics, this mix that we call the terroir, is very rich and diversified in Chablis, actually. So the Kimmeridgian is the main bedrock soil that we have here. Almost everywhere you grow Chablis or Premier and Grand Cru, that will be more on Kimmeridgian soil. Then you can find some Chablis on Portlandian, but Portlandian is mainly more for the Petit Chablis soil.
Okay, and Guillaume, the Portlandian you mentioned is at the top of the hill, yeah? So with climate change, some of those vineyards becoming more successful because they're cooler expressions. despite being on the lesser soil? Is there a sort of conflict there?
So with what's happening with climate change actually is that hold on, I'm going to move a little bit that so that you can see my face. Everything is changing with climate change. So it's quite exciting, I have to admit, because it's getting, everything is changing. All the wines start to have different characteristic, different body, different ripeness, and the expression of the climate change will be, of course, different depending on which climate you are. For instance, the climate change won't have the same impact on a premier cru like Montée de Tonnerre, for instance, than on a premier cru like Fourchaume, for instance. Fourchaume is more a premier cru, which is already quite richer, rounder, and riper, while Montée de Tonnerre is a premier cru which is more like austere and linear and very focused. And so you can imagine that the climate change on those two wines will have different impacts. We can think that Fourchaume will be even more riper, while the Montée de Tonnerre maybe will get a bit more richness or roundness into the wine. So that will be very interesting to see in the next decades, actually, the evolution of the terroirs. Because right now it's just the beginning. It's been only, let's say, 10 years that we start to have some climate change and we see the effect of the climate change on our everyday job, actually. But since the climate characteristic that we had in the beginning of the 20s, and today it's already different. Yeah. So how is it continue to evolve? We don't know. But one thing is sure is that today it's quite both interesting and challenging for us.
Because I remember the last time I was with you, we were talking about the 15 vintage and how it was a warmer vintage. And and you said that, you know, people, because I suggested that people are saying that Chablis, it's losing its definition and, you know, and the streak of acidity. But you made a very good point and you said, no, the terroir is just hidden for a little bit longer with this ripeness and it comes out eventually. So definitely. The longevity is still there, but you just have to be more patient. It's, as you say, it's a learning curve.
That's what we see, for example, now, if you open a bottle of 2003, if you remember, 2003 was the heat wave all over Europe. Heat wave, so in France, we did start the harvest in August 20 or 25 of August. And it was very rich and ripe and a lot of sugar, a lack of acidity. And everybody was saying as this time, that's not Chablis, that this vintage won't age. And so we even had issues commercially because some customer didn't want to ship that vintage because they say because the press, over press, etc. But when you open a bottle of 2003 now, not all the 2003, of course, it will depend, of course, of the winemaker, etc. But when you open a good bottle of a good winemaker today of 2003, you feel the freshness, you feel the oyster shell, you feel everything that you didn't feel when the wine was young, because it was under the vintage effect, the vintage influence on the wine that was hiding everything. But what we didn't know at this time is that at some point, terroir, at some point, the vintage effect always fade out and the terroir starts to rise. So that's, I think, one of the definition of a great terroir, actually. Yeah. At some point, the terroir can go over the vintage effect.
Yeah, which is just because a lot of people, for those of you listening who don't know what terroir is the translation of the soil and the landscape into the glass, basically. And some people who are scientists say there's no scientific basis for this. How does the soil come into the glass? But if you drink Chablis, or if you drink Sancerre, or if you drink any terroir-driven wine, sort of great Mosel Rieslings, you know, you can taste the different stone structure, the different soil structure, that you've got in the glass, and it's just fascinating. What would be really interesting, Guillaume, would be for you to go through your Premier Crus and talk a little bit about the different expressions that each Premier Cru has.
Sure. Yeah. Sure. So you have just my map again for a few seconds to show you mainly the first big two classification, I would say, of Premier Cru would be there is a Chablis with the little river here that divide the vineyards into two areas. So we talk about the right bank and the left bank. So that's the first classification, I would say, on the Premier Cru. When you speak quickly on Chablis, you would say this is left bank, this is right bank. So, and for a lot of people, I think they go very quickly to simplify this, saying that the left bank is like that, and the right bank, it's rich, it's powerful. Of course, it's a bank of the Grand Cru, and left bank, people will say it's more. It's not as rich. It's more simple. That's the first definition, but it's much more complicated like that, as you can imagine.
And that's because of the side valleys, isn't it? Because of all the different angles within the valleys.
In the left bank area, you have a lot of different expression of terroir. So it depends on where the grapes come from. So we'll start on a range. We'll start with the different Premier Cru that we have on the left bank to start. So on the left bank, we produce the Premier Cru named Montmain, Forêt, then Forêt, Buteau, Vaillon, and Séché. On the right bank, we produce Voloran and Montée de Tonnerre. That's for the Premier Cru. So Montmain, Forêt, and Buteau, those three Premier Cru, actually, they all come from the same valley, which is a valley that's not far from the village, leaving just the village here. It's south. How do you say in English? South
facing.
South facing. Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah.
South facing. Southeast exposure.
Yeah.
And what's important to say is that the three Premier Cru, Montmain, Forêt, and Buteau, we have the possibility, the winemaker that have vineyards in the three Premier Cru, they have the possibility commercially to label all the wine as Montmain if they want, which is one of the characteristics also that we have here, because in Chablis, we have 40 different Premier Cru. So to simplify a little bit for the consumer, they decided to make groups of Premier Cru, and the winemakers have the possibility to blend and to name with only the name of one of the Premier Cru that gave the name to all those areas. So that's on the market to have only maybe between let's say 15 different Premier Cru. But you are not obliged to do that. If you want to vinify separately all your climat, what we call a climat, you can do it. So that's what we do. So our Montmain is vinified separately than our Forêt, than our Buteau. Why do we do that? It's very simple, because it's three different terroirs. Okay, they belong to the same family, I would say, but it's three different terroirs if you look more in a more accurate way on the soil. Montmain is it's a cool area, not very high in altitude, quite cool, and it's quite rich in clay. Of course, we are in Chablis, so we have rocks everywhere, but in some parts it's a bit richer in clay than in some others. So Montmain is quite rich in clay, and it produces a wine. So clay plus cool area produces a wine which is always very delicate, floral, with sea breeze characteristic in the wine. If you continue a little bit in the valley, if you walk, 300 meters, 400 meters, then you arrive in Forêt, which is a sub-appellation of Montmain, but with totally different, because here in Forêt, no more clay, much more limestone, rocky, and the bedrock in Forêt is not depth at all. It's just about 50, 60 centimeter depth only. So the terroir is much more rocky, so it produces a wine that is more maybe focused and accurate, but we don't have instead of saline iodine minerality, it's more like a rocky minerality combined with a very touch of very light spices. And then if you continue again, so you walk 300-400 meters more, then you arrive at the end of the valley in what we call Buteau, which is another climate. And here it's back on clay soil, but different type of clay than in Momain. It's more like a white clay, more suffocating for the vineyards, more difficult for us also to work, because finding the appropriate way to plow, for instance, is quite difficult, because after the rain, it can be very
hard.
Compact and wet. And when it's dry, it's very dry and very hard as well. So it's working the soil is not very it's not very easy. Well, you have to find the right place. And it produces a wine because of this clay, which is very strong. It very often produces a wine that needs more time than the two others. It can be very austere and close when young, with hint of rusticity as well in the wine of Buteau. So you see, in these three areas, the three wines could have the same name, Momain, but for me, it would be a shame, because it's three different expression, very interesting different expression of this valley here. And then the next valley, it's the Vaillon Valley, actually.
This used to be my favorite. The expression of Vaillon. No, I think I'm going into sort of Monte de Tonnerre is sort of starting to pull me in a little bit more, but Vaillon, I just it's a lot. I always find it very precise.
It is, Vaillon is nice, and so in terms of, so it's just the next valley next to Momain, north of it, but same exposure roughly, but also the topography of the valley makes that it's very hot in this area, much hotter than on the Momain area. At the end, the maturity is always very earlier in Vaillon than in the other Premier Cru. We always start harvesting in Vaillon area because of this maturity. So, and you can feel in the wine, because it's a good combination between the soil, because here it's pure Kimmeridgian soil as well. But you have, it's a much more, in terms of ripeness, the style of wine is totally different. You have more stone fruits, white flesh fruits characteristic, a little bit of, sometimes a bit exotic characteristic in the wines of Vaillon. So it's both very rich in terms of fruit, but also thanks to the soil, very accurate and mineral. And within the valley of Vaillon, there are different subclimates as well. And there is one in which we have a parcel, which is named Séché, actually. So it's our parcel is more at the top of the hill. So with a different climate than at the bottom, maybe more freshness, thanks to the wind, actually. And the soil also is a bit different. So you will feel, comparing Séché and Vaillon, you will find more, Séché will be a bit more delicate. You will find more finesse in the wine, with a very strong expression of the Kimmeridgian, because it's less embedded with the ripe fruits that you have in the Vaillon. So then we go to the right bank to continue.
Yeah.
And on the right bank, we have two different Premier Cru, named Fourchaume and Monte de Tonnerre, which are probably the two most famous Premier Cru in Chablis. So Fourchaume is interesting because Fourchaume, it's a very long valley, actually, if I show you on the map. Because Fourchaume starts here and continue here up to here. So it just maybe 2, 3, 4 kilometers long valley. So
it's very far north. It's one of the furthest north, isn't it?
It was of the furthest north Premier Cru in Chablis.
Yeah.
If you
but
go,
it has
if you go further north, you will have vineyards, but it will be more Petit Chablis and Chablis.
Yeah.
Right. But in terms of exposure, the previous one, it was southeast. Now we are southwest. So you can imagine the previous one have more like the morning sun, while the two others, the Fourchomes, sorry, have more the afternoon sun. So you can imagine in terms of ripeness,
the heat.
also,
Yeah.
it's difficult. So in Fourchome, we are typically on a soil which is rich in clay, but not combined with freshness as we can have in the Mormont area, but combined with hot weather. So it produces a wine that is strong, very large, bodied, and full of aromatics. But within the Fourchome, you have different climates. You know, you have the most famous are L'Homme Mort, or Vaupulant, and Voleran, which is probably the most famous one. And it's in Voleran that we have our parcel of Fourchome.
Yeah.
Which is the closest part of Fourchome to the Grand Cru, actually. Voleran is closer to Les Preuses than to the rest of the Fourchome area, actually. It's a little bit of an exception. Plus, also, it's also disconnected from the rest of the valley. There is a small, there is a valley in between, so it's very particular. And so our parcel is in Voleran. So we put Voleran on the label, but we have noticed that the Fourchome name is so famous in some countries that our partners in those countries, they ask us not to put Voleran on the label, but to put Fourchome on the label, because Voleran is not famous in that country. So basically, we label it Voleran more from a few markets and for the French restaurants. That's all. Yeah, it's funny, but it's like that. And then you have next south of the Fourchome, you have the Grand Cru, and then after south again, you go to Monté de Tonnerre area. So Monté de Tonnerre, which is our last. Sorry, excuse me.
No, go for it. Go for it. Yeah.
Monté de Tonnerre, which is our last Premier Cru, sorry, is so it's the same exposure as the Fourchome, but the soil is different, the climate is different. Here we are back on a very rocky soil with a lot of Chiméridon, and like this, I brought a big stone of Chiméridon to show you. I don't know if you can see the oyster if I put it a little bit close to the camera. But this is Chiméridon. You see, this is a pure Chiméridon marl, which is actually it is an agglomerate of thousands of fossils of tiny oysters that are 150 million years old.
It is amazing.
That's in Monté de Tonnerre. This is the pure soil of Monté de Tonnerre, and above that you will have a lot of pebbles as well, embedded with some clay. So to me, it's the archetype of the Chablis soil, the Monté de Tonnerre, and it produces the archetype of the Chablis wine. The definition, my definition of Chablis would be that it's both powerful and very accurate, and it's focused, and it's with an aging potential, which is to me superior than the other Premier Cru of Chablis.
So Monté de Tonnerre is your favorite, Guillaume?
Quite often, I have to say. Yeah. They are all my favorite. You know, they are all my babies. I love them all. But sometimes, I think it's more like it's the fact that it's represent the best definition of my definition of Chablis, actually.
Okay. Well, I have some photos that I took from your website, which is amazing, by the way. It was like a treasure trove of photos. So I'm going to screen share. So we can what we'll do is go through the photos, and I've put them in order of. Hold on, let me go right here. I've put them in order of. Kind of winter. We're doing the seasons now, so I'd love just a brief explanation of how you work in the vineyards in each season. So this is obviously winter here in your vineyards.
It is winter. So winter mainly winter is dedicated to pruning. the vineyards. So we prune the vineyards in the vittles in the winter. The idea is to prune as late as possible, but so we try to start the pruning not too early. So basically, we start the pruning is pruning. We start the pruning in December and to finish in March.
Yeah, and so it's hard work.
Yeah, it is very hard work, and each vine you have to think before pruning. Pruning is the thing that you cannot do mechanically, because you have to think. When you prune a vineyard, you have to think of how it will be after, how to define the orientation of the vineyard, look at the buds, how it will be after. It's a real job, actually. And that's everything starts here with the pruning. That's where you define your vineyards for the future, for the coming vintage, actually. And for the next vintage, of course.
A lot of people have recognized that badly pruned vines are unhealthy vines, because if you take away too much wood and leave too many scars, then you're opening the vine up to viruses and things like that, aren't you?
Also, yeah, of course.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, so
and also during the winter, what we do at the end of the winter, we do, during the winter, we plow. It's also the time to plow everything, all the vineyards, so that we can air the soil also and get rid of the adventices, which is a French word, but in English I think you say weed. Get rid of the weeds that will start to grow a bit everywhere. And also in the winter, it's the time to put all the organic fertilizer in the vineyards.
Yeah, and do you use sort of local manure, or because you farm organically, don't you?
We do, yeah. We are not certified yet, because it took me a long time to ask for the certification, because I think that in France we have already too much paperwork to do, and I didn't want to have more paperwork to do, and working with all the administration and stuff like that. But finally, I decided with also with a little bit of a pressure of my vineyard manager to go like that. So I told him, okay, you deal with all the paper. And he told me, okay, I deal. So the certification is on its way now.
Yeah. Brilliant, yeah. Because it is.
And that's it. So that's for the winter.
Okay, I'm going to go into spring. Hold on, there we go. So
that's not spring yet. That's still pruning. But what you see here, we say that the vineyard cries, actually. So that means that happened at the end of the winter, beginning of the spring, when you continue to prune at this time. The fact that the vineyards cries, it's just sap coming out. So it's a sign that shows that the vineyard is ready to grow again for the coming vintage.
And you want to be pruned before the sap starts running, don't you? Otherwise you interfere with the growth.
No, but at the end of the pruning, you always find sap. But what's happening with global warming is that now you can sometimes find sap in the middle of the winter.
Okay.
So that's another consequence of the global warming.
And the vines then don't get a proper break, do they?
Exactly. Yeah. So that's a bud. So that's a bud that's already starting to grow. So we call it in French bud bourgeon dans le coton. So it means bud into how do you say coton? Cotton?
Cotton, yeah. Yeah, because it looks like
cotton.
Yeah.
So it's ready to explode, and at this time it's already frost sensitive.
Mm. And this is a real problem for you, isn't it? And that's why we have this beautiful picture now.
This is a real problem. So the spring frost is a real problem. And what's interesting is that we realize that with the global warming, we will probably have more and more spring frost issues.
And people think it's because it's colder, don't they? But they don't realize it's because the budding starts earlier, and so the frost is still at the same time. The bud is early.
Because we don't have any more real cold winter that we used to have. The winter looks more like a long autumn with some interruptions of very cold time, but just for a few days. So because there is no winter, so the bud break is much earlier. And so the vineyard is sensitive to frost much earlier as it used to be. If you talk with the old people now, back in the 70s, the 80s, it was in May. They were talking about the spring frost in May. And but now, what we have to know is that even in April, it's already cold. And now we are sensitive to spring frost in April and May. And the big difference is that in April, it's not the same frost as in May. The May frost is what we call white frost. It's the typical frost that you will have in the morning at the sunrise when it's the coolest time of the night. And it's very localized, bottom of the valleys, very not high in altitude, bottom of the valleys, the lowest point in altitude, very localized. So they used to manage it a little bit by protecting all of this area. That's for the May frost. In April, it's not the same characteristic of frost. That's what we call the black frost. So it's just like a massive cold air that is coming from all the area. So you can imagine that it's not localized at the bottom of the hills, it's just everywhere. So that's what happened in 2016 and 2017. We were focusing on protecting the wines that we are always protecting from frost. And while we were protecting the bottom of the parcel by heating, we realized the day after that the frost hits everywhere, including the top of the parcels, places that usually never frost. So that explains why in 2017, we lost 45% of our production.
Yeah, that was really tough.
Yeah.
But 18 as a vintage has been a lovely vintage for you, hasn't it?
Yeah, 18 is a perfect example of the positive effect of global warming on the wines of Chablis.
Yeah. And you know, some might worry because 18 is so concentrated for the reds that the whites might be lacking a little bit of acidity. But from what I've heard and seen, the acidity is still very much there, but with a lovely concentration to support it.
Yeah, that's very interesting because you realize that yes, analytically the acidity is lower, definitely, but in terms of taste, when you drink the wine, you don't feel that the acidity is lower. And I think it's a question of balance. If you look the Chablis that they used to harvest back in the 70s, first of all, they used to harvest in October, while now we harvest in early September or sometime August. So you realize in just less than 50 years, we move from almost sometime maybe 1 month and a half earlier in terms of harvest. But they used to harvest grape in October that were not perfectly ripe, actually. Yeah. If you look at the grapes at this time, they had low alcohol, maybe 10.5% potential alcohol because of the sugar, with very high acidity. So they used to chaptalize a lot to artificially get this balance between sugar and acidity, because to me that's one of the key to have a good wine. And so they used to chaptalize a lot, and they used to produce wine that were very austere, very high acidity. And all the people were saying, "Oh, this wine needs time. You can't drink it now. It's too strong, too austere." What we realize now is that we just harvest perfectly ripe grape. We do not chaptalize anymore. It's been maybe 8 or 10 years that we did not chaptalize, because the grapes are just perfectly ripe. We have a decent level of, even a good level of sugar in the wines, because we have naturally between 12 and 13.5 alcohol in the wines. And we still have a decent acidity that makes the balance just great. So very often I say to the people that I'm the lucky generation, actually.
Sorry, I muted myself because my dog was barking. But you are, exactly. And I think what you say is so true about the fact that the ripeness and the acidity, even though on paper it is quite low, well, not low, but a lot lower than it used to be, on the palate, it's refreshing. And I was thinking about that and thinking the fact that I was in the Roussillon, and I talk about the Roussillon a lot because I've discovered the whites there especially are fantastic, and they have they're obviously from a much warmer climate, but the acidity there, it's perceived as much higher because of their underlying minerality in the wines. Yeah, and I think this is always going to be your strength. It's always going to be there, this flinty minerality that gives you a zing, which can be perceived as acidity. I've got the 17 Chablis. I realized I actually regretted I should have sort of gone up a level and had the Monte de Tonnerre. But I think Michael mentioned he's drinking Montrachet, so I'm sorry that he's not drinking Chablis, but at least he's in the right sort of region. And I'd say the father has a little bit of your wine in his glass. Does anyone else have any Louis Michel? Please do feel free to unmute yourself if you want to say about what you're drinking. Have a quick little no, everyone's being shy.
Me too. I'm drinking.
You're having the 17 Chablis too?
No, I'm having a Monte de Tonnerre 12.
Oh, Guillaume. Yeah, you see, there you go. I'll have to. But this is utterly delicious. I mean, I've just been. It's a we say basic, but it's a generic Chablis. You don't use any oak. You don't use.
Yeah. Talk a little bit of the vinification. So because my aim, and that was also the aim of my grandfather and my uncle before me, is to produce a wine that is we try to have the best terroir expression of Chablis. So to do that, and also because of the range that we have, we are lucky to have all those Premier Cru and Grand Cru. What we want to show is the diversity and the richness of the terroir in Chablis. So that's why all our wines are vinified exactly the same way, from the Petit Chablis to the Chablis, the Grand Cru, sorry, the vinification is exactly the same for all the wines, which means no oak barrel at all. It's 100% stainless steel tank, because for me, it's the best way to preserve the terroir expression because it's neutral aromatically. And also it's the best way to keep the freshness and the tension that I want in my wine. And everything is vinified through natural yeast, of course. We do not inoculate with selected yeast.
Yeah.
The malolactic fermentation is also done spontaneously.
Yeah.
We do not inoculate with bacteria.
And so while you're talking about the malolactic, obviously with the reduction in the acid levels, malolactic is such a big part of Chablis. Yes. Can you see in the future some people actually having to pull back from malolactic a little bit?
Probably some people will do that. Probably some people will stop the malolactic, and especially people that harvest a bit too late, I would say.
Yeah, exactly. And because it's so much, it's that dairy kind of expression that you get, which to me, it just, if I blind taste wine, if I get that sort of dairy flinty note, then immediately it's Chablis, but without that, we'll be a little bit lost. So
exactly, sure.
But
I think the malolactic is part of Chablis vinification. So far for me, is no way to avoid it.
No. And do you worry about picking earlier? Because I remember when I was in Australia in Margaret River, and Dave Honan, I was there with the father, and Dave Honan, who's a bit of a sort of momentous winemaker over there, well, in our minds anyway, he's great. And he was saying, I walk through the vineyards and I pick up my grape and I taste it, and I only harvest when the autumn colors come in. And he said he only harvests when the pip is truly crunchy. And he said now with the earlier harvest, with the hotter summers, it's very difficult to get the cool nights and the warm days. And so the flavors just aren't catching up like they used to. Are you worried about that? Because that's what happens in the autumn, isn't it? The sugars slow down, the cool nights slow everything down, and the flavors can accumulate to give you that
sure.
lovely expression. So,
Yeah.
picking earlier, you're losing that, aren't you?
But also the ripeness of the grapes is so different. So you see, so we taste, when we taste the grapes, they are just when we decide to harvest, we taste the grape, of course, but very important also is to taste the seeds.
Yeah,
Actually.
exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
the ripeness of the seed. But yes, because we harvest earlier, we miss the last months when the weather is different. But if we continue that, I think that harvesting overripe grapes will be too dangerous for me.
Yeah. But I mean, so far all the wines I taste from you are so terroir driven and so tight and so, as you said yourself, accurate and focused. You were talking about Monte de Tonnerre, but I think it applies to all your wines because of the fact that you use stainless steel. And do you use, what's your lees management? You don't really use lees either, do you? You're very much a Puritan.
Actually, we used to, but with the first of all, the global warming, so the grape characteristic is different. The wine will be originally more richer, and plus the fact that we vinify in natural yeast.
Yeah.
When you vinify in natural yeast, the fermentation process is very long, much longer than with selected yeast. With selected yeast, you add the yeast, and then let's say between 10 and 50 days after, it's done. Everything is done. With natural yeast, it's a question of months. It's a 2-3 months fermentation.
Yeah.
So it's 2 or 3 months during which the wine is moving, bubbling. So the least contact. So the least contact that we have during the vinification for me now is enough. So
it's enough, yeah.
What we do over the last vintages, especially the hot, warm vintages, is that when we rack the wine after the vinification, we do not keep any more lees. Otherwise, I'm afraid that the wine will be too heavy, too flubby.
Yeah,
and also I don't want that.
Also, for those of you who are listening and going wild fermentation, non-wild sort of cultured yeast, basically you can just take the grapes in from the vineyard and they have wild yeast on the bloom, on the sort of ripe skins, and it comes into the winery and it starts the fermentation. But these yeast aren't as strong as your cultured yeast, and they can't withstand alcohols that are as high and things like that. So that's why it takes longer, isn't it? It gives you more diversity, more complexity, and more expression from the vineyard, which is another discussion. But again, you don't have the certainty of a fast straightforward fermentation.
Yes, because the selected yeast, as it says, selected yeast, the yeast has been selected for its characteristic, the fact that it's strong, the fact that it's resist to high alcohol, so it can finish the fermentation till the end. The natural yeast, you have different species of yeast, actually. And it's very long because basically the fermentation will start with one category of yeast, and then that will die after a few days of working, depending on the growing of the alcohol level in the wine. And then after that, it's another species of yeast that this species will be more comfortable to finish the fermentation in an alcoholic environment that will continue the fermentation, etc. So you will have different species of yeast that will do the fermentation. Yeah. Some are very slow, some are less slow. So that's quite long. And also the time between two yeasts can be also long. So sometimes nothing happens. You will have a first fermentation, then it stops, and then you have to wait a few days for a fermentation to start again. So that's the sign of a new yeast starting the fermentation.
Must be a little bit worrying, Guillaume.
It is.
Yeah.
Well, it is in the beginning, but if you work if your winery is clean, if you don't have any bacteria or stuff in your winery, if it's clean, if you are very careful, if you manage well the temperature, which is very important as well, then there is no risk.
No, it is. It's all about managing the hygiene in the winery, and I think that's where a lot of people go wrong. Is dirty wineries. They think a sort of nice old winery with lots of oak and lots of sort of musty smells is you know.
Yeah. Those people. Yeah, you have more chance to have big problems. Yeah.
No, I actually have pictures at the end of the slides of your winery, and it's you know, the point of difference is the fact that it's all bottles. There's no sorry, I think my ear things have clicked out. Oak. There's no there's only bottles, and your love that in itself is clean. But tell us a little bit. So this here on our slide we have is the start, the inflorescence. The flowering.
This is a full flower. Yeah. Which so this year it took the flower. This year was last week, which is really advanced. Usually flower is mid-May.
Okay. Yeah.
So this year, if it continues like that, we're going to harvest at the end of August.
Yeah. And have you had the rain that a lot of France has had in the last few weeks?
Yeah, not as much as in the south.
Yeah.
But it's quite stormy right now. We had a storm today. The forecast for the next few days is storm. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Well, we're the same, but we've had the most amazing weather in our lockdown.
Right.
We're all planning our vineyards already. I can see this is why everyone's tuning in. They're learning the tricks of Chablis for Irish Chablis. We could, you know, put a shamrock on the label and we'd be grand. So this is the beginning of your shoots.
Yes, this is a shoot typically. Yeah.
And then this is how you work the soil, which is interesting.
So this is a winter plowing, as I said earlier. This picture was took in the winter. Yeah.
And you do that because it's all about the soil life, isn't it? The microorganisms in the soil.
It's it's soil life, and it's also getting rid of the weeds, because when you grow organically, you cannot use herbicides, obviously.
Yeah. No, it is. It's more work. How many more hours in the vineyard do you think it is to work organically than conventionally?
That's a good question. Maybe 20% more.
Yeah, it does make a difference. Yeah.
It also depends on your team.
Yeah.
You know, it's always the same. Yeah.
This is it. So who takes these photos anyway, Guillaume? Because they're really impressive.
No, it's a photograph.
Yeah, no, but who takes the photo? Okay. Yeah, because they're amazing. I got drawn in yesterday. I was looking at them going, where is this?
It's a professional photographer, actually.
Okay, yeah. Well, you could have said, it's your hobby.
Yeah, I could have. Yeah. This is Vaudésir Valley.
Okay. Yeah.
So now this is a Grand Cru area, and if you look at this, you can see something very interesting, is that in the Vaudésir Valley, you have two exposure. So there is one slope facing south and one slope is facing north. So that's quite interesting, because first of all, you could think that every Grand Cru should at least have a south facing exposure. That's right, but with some exception. There is an exception here. You can have some Grand Cru facing north.
Yeah.
And what's interesting also in this valley is that this valley is also very hot in the summer. It's a heat trap. So all our Vaudésir comes from the north-facing part of it, actually. So it's very interesting, especially in hot vintages, so to be in that part, because it helps a lot to keep freshness in the wine.
And with climate change, it's a winner for the future.
It's the future, definitely.
Yeah.
And to give you an idea, when we harvest our parcel, when we start harvesting of parcel, it's on average, it's, let's say, maybe between 5 and 8 days after the other that did the harvest on the south-facing part, to give you the idea.
I'm loving the chat on the group chat. What time? Sorry, I just wanted to interrupt because it just made me, I have to keep an eye on it in case there are questions, but Richard is saying to everyone, does anyone know if the shop is open till 7 or 8 tonight? And Richard, I don't know. I think
I'm unmuting. I think it's late, but somebody had the audacity and said, what, super value?
yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, but yeah, so citizens, but there we go. Okay, and I hope that's
I
because
think
you're all
8
rushing
o'clock.
down to buy your Louis Michel Chablis. I'm sure it is. I think it is 8 o'clock, but don't hold me to it. I'm sorry. That's really appalling of me. I should be up on my opening hours. So, okay, let me move the slide here again. See, I'm the only one who can see ahead on this. So, Guillaume, tell me about this slide.
So this is where's that? Let me try to find it. Oh, this I think it's the Vaillon area.
Okay.
Yeah, Vaillon Valley. So you can see we have a lot of vineyards, of course, in all our valleys, but we also have at the top, sometimes the soil is totally different and it's impossible to grow vineyards. That's everywhere you will still have a forest, actually.
And a lot of wild boar running around up there.
Yes, but it's not a big issue for us. It's not a big issue for us. There are a lot, but it's not a big issue for us. Yeah.
Yeah, good, because it's becoming a problem in a lot of regions, isn't it?
Yes, we have problem with oh, I don't know the name in English. What's the name of the Bambi, the cartoon?
Oh, the deer.
The deer.
Yeah.
We have issues with deer because they love to eat baby shoots.
Okay. Yeah. And they're just spreading. So that's some lovely getting ripe, close to ripeness.
That's right. Ready to get ready for harvest.
Yeah, you get the lovely sort of, and there you have your autumnal colors.
This is autumn. This is probably for me. This is the time where the Chablis area is the most beautiful.
Yeah, it is utterly beautiful.
All the vineyards turn into yellow gold like that. So when I see that, I don't understand why. That's the name Côte d'Or comes from here.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we should be Côte d'Or as well.
Yeah. Yeah, they stole it. And then this one I'm talking about, your lovely cellars with the stone.
Yeah, that's it. That's just behind me. That's my. Yeah. So that's the private cellar.
Yeah.
So that's where I keep all the wines for private consumption. Private means me, but partners, customers, journalists, etc. This is the wines I keep. I can't sell those wines because I have the possibility to every year we have the possibility to take some wine for private consumption because everything is regulated here, as you can imagine.
Yeah.
So I can't sell those wine. I can open it here. So if you want to taste those wine, you have to come to Chablis. Yeah.
Well, that's a very good excuse. We're all looking at those beautiful autumnal slopes and hoping that by autumn we'll be able to get somewhere. But
yeah, sure. I hope so.
Yeah. I hope so. But tell me, that's one of the sort of, I remember being a young sort of, thinking I knew it all, did my WSET level 2. I was starting to sell a little bit of wine and I really, and I saw Chablis, little sort of generic Chablis, and I thought at 2 years old, it was knackered. Little did I know that Chablis has such longevity in the bottle. So what are the sort of age, your generic Chablis, this is the 17 vintage, this will keep drinking for another 4 or 5 years, won't it?
Oh, yeah, easily. So it will depend on the vintage. Some vintage is better than some other, but on average, I would say that a basic Chablis is, let's say, between 5 and 8 years.
Yeah.
And when it's a Premier Cru, it's between 8 and 15 years, and Grand Cru between 12 and 20 years. But of course, you can open bottle of Chablis that are more than 20 years that are still beautiful. But then after, it also depends on how people like their Chablis, because when you talk with people all over the world, you realize that people drink Chablis young.
Yeah, this is it, and too young, and it's such a pity.
And too young.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Sure.
I know as importers, we sell, a huge amount of our business was to the on-trade. Try not to sort of, but it's not at the moment, obviously, depressingly. But but you would sell you would sell Premier Cru Chablis and Grand Cru Chablis into the on-trade, and they would be used immediately, and it's sacrilege because it's like taking a baby out and expecting them to know how to work. I think, we've all got to spread the message that if you buy Chablis young, you can't, you need to sit on it. You need to let it evolve. I'll never forget when I was younger. I think I was sort of in my teens, and the father sort of, has always had a big thing for Grand Cru Chablis. And I used to, because it's got these sort of such perfect, delicate nuances. As a teenager who drank Buckfast and a lot of vodka and stuff, I didn't really appreciate it. And it took me until I think my late 20s to actually understand what to look for and how much, evolution can happen within a bottle of Chablis. And I just now, I think what sort of really made it come home to me was actually sitting with Nigel in Chablis last time we were there, having a bit of foie gras a la creme brulee and drinking a bottle of really good Premier Cru Chablis out there with a little bit of age, and just going, this is it, we've arrived. And I think that's the thing about Chablis. You don't need to dress it up with oak. You don't need to, you don't need to overwork it with lees. It's from the soil, it's from the vineyards, and that's so special. You're like a caretaker of this terroir, really, aren't you?
Sure. Yeah. To me, Chablis is the terroir of Chablis is misunderstood by a lot of people.
Yeah. No, it really is. It really is. I think I'm good. I think Martin wanted to ask the question, so I'm going to ask Martin to unmute himself. And apparently the shop shut at 7. Sorry, guys. And ask the question that you wanted to ask, Martin. So if you want to unmute yourself, the floor is yours.
Hi, Guillaume. It's been great so far. It's a question I ask everybody the same. Would you be involved in the winemaking industry if it wasn't for your family and predecessors? Because obviously there's a bit of an envy when you're born into it. You almost 100% a given or pass on the reins. But would you be involved in wine industry if it wasn't for your family?
Yeah.
And if not, what else would you do, or what your other hobbies are?
So
and I'm good myself because I have kids around. So
good question, because actually I'm a bit in between, because I'm from the Michel family, but through my mom. So my mom was born in Chablis, but she left Chablis when she was 18 to study for 1 year in the US, and then back to Paris to continue her studies. So, and where she met my dad at the university, and she had a career in Paris. So I was born in Paris. I'm a Parisian. I'm the most Parisian of all the Chablis people. So I had a first life in Paris, because I left Paris when I was more than 30 years old, when I decided to quit Paris and come back here. So I did try both situations. And I decided to come to Chablis because it was a passion, of course, and but also because I had the opportunity, of course, because if you are not from the winemaking family, it can be very difficult and cost a lot of money to start as a winemaker. So you can work as an employee, of course. So that, and but that's different, of course. When you have your own terroir, your own vineyards, and it's part of your blood, it's part in your family. So there is something like that tells you, yes, you have to do it, but it's not any kind of family pressure or something like that. It was definitely a decision I made. And before that, I worked in communication for 7 years.
Thanks very much. No, that's why I asked, because it's so hard to get back into that wine industry. You kind of gone back to your root.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, thank you, Guillaume.
You're welcome.
I think it's as you know, all of us are sitting here going, God, I wish that my mother was owned a Chablis Domaine, and I could sort of leave Paris and go and spend a bit of time there. It sounds so wonderful, the sort of romantic views of strolling the sort of few hundred meters along the Premier Cruise and imagining the wine that you're going to taste later is amazing. I just, Guillaume, I think we're all envious, but we know it's hard work. It's not easy. And as you say, it's difficult. But I think you touched on something there, the fact that land is so expensive. No one can really enter into the wine industry if they want to, and even there are some children who don't want to be in it, but they can't sell their parcel because it would take part of Domaine. It's a very difficult problem in France at the moment, isn't it?
And in some places it's getting very expensive. If you think of the rest of Burgundy, which I think it will be very complicated for them at some points, because the land is so expensive that even in the family they cannot keep it because of succession. To pay the succession rate, sometimes they have to sell a parcel just to pay the succession rates. And so now it's getting more and more expensive that even in the family they cannot afford to get, because the succession rate is so high that at some point they decide to sell everything. So that's you start to have foreign money that get into that, and that's not very good. It's
really
for the
depressing.
Heredity. Yeah, it is. But in Chablis, it's not like that. Chablis is still affordable, even if it's quite expensive. Because if you look at some, I would say that today 1 hectare of Premier Cru, if you want to purchase one hectare of Premier Cru, you will need to pay something like 450,000 euros just to have the land. Yeah. And then after that, you have to manage everything, the vineyards, the vinification, and everything. All the tools, everything. A tractor is very expensive. Everything is expensive. Yeah. But in Chablis, even if it's quite expensive, there is not so far. I would like to touch wood, but I don't have wood. I have only stainless steel. But so far, there are not a lot of foreign money that is invested into Chablis, which is good.
Yeah, that is good because it's horrible. I would hate to see Burgundy going the same way as Bordeaux.
Sure, exactly.
It just loses the roots.
If it continues like that, it's going to be even maybe worse than Bordeaux in Burgundy.
Yeah. Well, do we have any more questions from the floor? Anyone want to comment on what they're drinking? Say they wish they were drinking Chablis. The father, go on, father.
I would just say, hello, Guillaume. It's lovely to see you.
Hello. Nice to see you.
I'm really sad not to be in Chablis talking to you. But
next time.
I'm drinking your latest vintage, which is your 18.
Okay.
It's young, it's youthful, it's showing absolutely beautifully. It's nectar. It is so good. So we were talking about aging Chablis. This is a Chablis which is drinking now, and it's drinking.
It is, and because it's the ripeness, as I said earlier, it's typical of a perfect ripeness.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it'll just evolve into the terroir and. It's amazing.
I have a question for Harriet. Willie, I did have 3 bottles of Grand Nuit, quite an old vintage in my cellar, and I can't find them anywhere.
Well, I haven't got them.
And I had a 2012 Montmartre, which is probably not their best, but I can't find that either. So I'm
shit. Yeah. Maybe the mother's got a penchant for a decent Chablis that she hasn't told you about.
Yeah, once when I was away, I left a bottle of the Grand Nuit in the fridge, and I can't remember, it was in early 2000, and I forgot to leave wine for Penny. So when I came back, I saw the empty bottle.
Yeah. Well, obviously you started something then, Father. But yeah. I think if no one has anything else to contribute, I'll formally end this and stop recording, and we can stay on and chat if we want to. But I just want to say, I actually realized I took a mental note, Guillaume, to go back and do my revision, because when you were talking about the expressions of the I see someone wants to have a word, so I'll let you in a minute, Michael. The expressions of the Premier Cru, I used to pride myself on really knowing them and being able to. So you've actually made me realize I want to go and read another book on Chablis and take notes and just remember, because there's so much to learn. There's so much to the region and to the wines, and Yeah, and I think to really enjoy it, you need to get underneath it. And I'm really jealous for your map, because I do have a map like that, but I think it's actually in the shop. So I was hunting around for it today, but I didn't find it. And I have a rock as well, like your rock, and that's packed in a box somewhere. So I'm really glad you brought yours to the party, Guillaume. And thank you so much. And I'm going to let Martin, if you want to unmute yourself, do go ahead. Not Martin, Michael. I think Michael had a question.
Oh, thanks. I was just wanted to ask, how do you expect the 2018 to evolve over the coming years, or how do you expect the taste to change?
It's a good question. I think that it's typical as what's happened when you have a strong vintage effect, which is the style of the 18, because 18 is this powerful, it's fleshy, is ripeness. So I think that the terroir definition will be even more accurate with time in those wine. There will be more and more fine into the terroir definition, even if I think that what I found in the 18 is that this terroir definition is already here, even if the wine are really, really young. That was not the case in 2015, for instance. I remember that the 2015s were under the vintage effect for a very long time, and it took a lot of time for the terroir to start to explode, and which is the case right now. 15 is absolutely beautiful if you're drinking right now. So I think 18 is going to be a bit the same way, but even probably more interesting, because I clearly start to, even today that it's still very young, I start to recognize the different terroir in 18.
Thank you.
Brilliant. Well, thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
I think, you know, it's been brilliant. It's been so we're so informed now, and really interesting and fun. And I hope that everyone will join us. We're going to do another Word with Winemaker in 2 weeks' time.
Cool.
It might not be, it's a very high bar to stand up to, Guillaume, because your knowledge and your explanation of everything is just so interesting and informative, and really, really helpful. And obviously, a lot of you, hopefully you haven't scurried down to the shop tonight, but you'll be scurrying down to the shop tomorrow, or ordering online, because we do have a lot of the Louis Michel wines there, and we have them in our new Burgundy offer as well. So do stock up now, because you know it will last and will only improve. And for those of you worried about your own drinking window, don't worry. As Guillaume said, the 18s are drinking well now as well. So don't fret. But yeah, thank you, Guillaume. So I'm going to formally stop recording now, and then we can chat if we want. People can hang around and chat.